They thought the most dangerous man in the city was the one being hunted that night. They were wrong. Ava Johnson had exactly 4 minutes left before her delivery app ended her shift when she turned onto a narrow side street in downtown Chicago. The November rain had eased into a cold mist, coating the pavement in silver reflections from the neon signs above. Her electric bike hummed quietly beneath her as she checked the address one last time. Apartment 4B. Extra ranch dressing. Leave at the door. It was the kind of order she had completed hundreds of times before. Invisible work. Quiet work. The kind that paid just enough to keep the lights on in her small apartment and cover the medical bills that seemed to arrive faster than her paychecks. Ava preferred it that way. At 24 years old, she had mastered the art of being overlooked. Customers rarely remembered her face. Neighbors barely knew her name. Even in a city packed with millions of people, she moved through life like a shadow. And shadows were safe. At least that was what she told herself. The alley ahead was darker than the surrounding streets. Old brick buildings rose on both sides, blocking most of the city lights. Water dripped steadily from rusted fire escapes overhead. Ava normally avoided shortcuts like this after midnight, but freezing temperatures and a 12-hour workday had weakened her judgment. She just wanted to finish her last delivery and go home. Then she saw them. 7 men stood farther down the alley. They weren't speaking loudly. They weren't arguing. They were simply waiting. Something about the stillness immediately felt wrong. Ava slowed her bike without realizing it. The men seemed focused on someone standing near the opposite end of the alley. At first, she could only make out a silhouette. Tall, motionless, hands tucked inside the pockets of a dark overcoat. The figure didn't appear nervous, didn't appear trapped, didn't even appear interested in leaving. For a brief moment, Ava considered turning around. Whatever was happening had nothing to do with her. That was the rule she had lived by for years. Keep moving. Stay invisible. Survive. But curiosity made her glance 1 second longer than she should have. A passing car illuminated the alley with its headlights. The light swept across the man's face. Ava felt her stomach tighten. Everyone in Chicago knew that face. Ethan Kang. Newspapers called him a businessman. Local rumors called him something else. The kind of man whose name traveled through restaurants, office buildings, and police stations in lowered voices. People feared him. Some admired him. Most stayed far away from him. Yet here he stood completely alone. No security team. No black SUVs. No entourage. Just one man facing 7 strangers in the middle of a cold November night. The mist drifted through the alley as silence settled over the scene. Ethan Kang lifted his gaze toward the men surrounding him. None of them moved. None of them spoke. And somehow that silence felt heavier than any argument. Ava tightened her grip on the handlebars. Every instinct told her to leave immediately. She had a delivery to finish. A life to return to. Problems that were already large enough without borrowing someone else's. She began turning her bike toward the street. Then one of the men finally spoke a name. A single name carried through the cold air. The moment Ava heard it, her entire body froze. The delivery bag slipped slightly from her shoulder. Her expression changed, because that wasn't just any name. It belonged to a chapter of her life she had spent years trying to bury. And for the first time that night, Ava Johnson stopped being invisible. Ava Johnson had spent 3 years convincing herself that the past was gone. 3 years of early mornings, late-night deliveries, overdue bills, and quiet routines designed to keep her life small enough to remain unnoticed. Yet the moment that name echoed through the alley, every carefully built wall inside her mind began to crack. The cold air suddenly felt sharper. The distant traffic noise faded into the background. She knew that name. More importantly, she knew the man who carried it. Marcus Reed. Most people would never have recognized it. To them, it was just another ordinary name spoken in the dark. To Ava, it belonged to someone connected to the worst period of her life. She remained beside her bike, motionless. One of the men near the center of the alley glanced toward Ethan Kang. "You should have listened when you had the chance," he said calmly. Ethan showed no visible reaction. Rainwater rolled from the edge of his overcoat as he stood beneath the dim glow of a security light. The strange thing was not his confidence. Everyone expected powerful men to appear confident. The strange thing was how tired he looked. Ava had seen his face on television, in newspaper articles, and on giant billboards downtown. Those photographs always showed a man who seemed completely in control. The person standing in the alley looked different. Older somehow. More human. More alone. Another passing vehicle cast a brief flash of light across the brick walls. For a second, Ava noticed something else. Ethan was not watching the men surrounding him. He was watching the exits, measuring distances, calculating possibilities, looking for answers. The realization surprised her. He was not panicking. He was thinking. The city called Ethan Kang dangerous because he was powerful. Ava suddenly wondered if his real strength came from something else entirely. A sharp gust of wind pushed mist through the alley. One of the men adjusted his jacket and laughed quietly. "Nobody is coming for you tonight." The others exchanged confident smiles. Ava should have left. Every instinct she had developed over the past 3 years screamed the same warning. Get on the bike. Finish the delivery. Go home. Stay invisible. Yet her feet refused to move. Because Marcus Reed was not simply a memory. He was a question that had never been answered. A door she had spent years trying to keep closed. And now someone had opened it again. Her phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket. Delivery reminder. Order overdue. Customer waiting. The ordinary notification felt absurd compared to the scene unfolding 50 feet away. Ava silenced it without looking. Then Ethan finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, and surprisingly quiet. "You are not here because of me." The alley fell silent. Several faces changed instantly. Tiny reactions. Barely noticeable. But Ava saw them. Ethan saw them too. The men exchanged brief glances before looking away. And in that moment, Ava realized something important. Ethan Kang had already figured out what she was only beginning to understand. Whatever had brought these men into the alley tonight was larger than anyone realized. Larger than Ethan. Larger than the city rumors that surrounded his name. And somehow, impossibly, connected to a life Ava Johnson thought she had left behind forever. The mist thickened between the buildings as the city clock somewhere in the distance struck midnight. Ava could feel the cold settling into her jacket, but she barely noticed it anymore. Her attention remained fixed on the small group standing in the alley. The silence after Ethan's observation lingered longer than it should have. Nobody rushed to answer him. Nobody laughed. Nobody denied it. That alone told her he was right. Whatever had brought these men here tonight was not about settling a score with one of the most powerful men in Chicago. It was something else. Something hidden beneath the surface. Ethan slowly shifted his gaze across the faces in front of him. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable. "The mistake you made," he said quietly, "was assuming I would not recognize confusion when I see it." One of the men forced a smile. "You always think you are the smartest person in the room." "No," Ethan replied. "I simply pay attention." The answer seemed to unsettle them more than any threat could have. Ava tightened her grip on her bicycle handle. She had spent years studying people without letting them know she was watching. Delivery work taught you that. You learned who tipped generously and who never would. You learned who smiled because they were kind and who smiled because they wanted something. Tonight she saw uncertainty spreading through the group. Small signs, nervous glances, shifting feet, brief eye contact that disappeared as quickly as it formed. The man called Marcus Reed was not there. His name had been spoken, but he was nowhere in sight. That detail bothered her more with every passing second. Because Marcus Reed had never been the kind of man who trusted others to handle important matters. If his name was connected to this meeting, his absence meant he was somewhere nearby, watching, waiting, or hiding. The thought sent an uncomfortable chill through her chest. 3 years earlier, Ava had promised herself she would never hear that name again. She had moved apartments twice, changed jobs, changed routines, built an entirely new life. Ordinary, predictable, safe. Yet standing in that alley, she felt the old version of herself beginning to wake up. The version she had buried beneath delivery schedules and rent payments. A car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene. For a fraction of a second, Ethan's eyes moved past the men and landed directly on Ava. She immediately looked away, but the moment stayed with her. It was not a look of surprise. It was not fear. It was recognition. Not because he knew who she was, but because he understood something important. He knew she did not belong there. And somehow, he suspected she was connected to whatever was unfolding. The realization unsettled her. Her phone vibrated again. Another notification. Another reminder from the normal world. Ava ignored it. Across the alley, Ethan returned his attention to the men surrounding him. Someone sent you here, he said. The real question is why. No one answered. Yet in the heavy silence that followed, Ava felt a certainty growing stronger inside her. The trap had already closed around everyone present. The only difference was that most of them did not realize it yet. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The city seemed to hold its breath with them. Water dripped from a broken gutter somewhere above, each drop echoing against the brick walls. Ava knew she should leave now. Every additional second increased the chance of becoming involved in something she did not understand. She slowly turned her bicycle toward the street and placed one foot on the pedal. That was when she heard another name. Not Marcus Reed. A different name. One she had not heard spoken aloud in years. Her heart stopped. The voice came from one of the men near the back of the group. It was casual, almost careless, as though he had no idea who might be listening. The Harper file should have stayed buried. Ava froze instantly. The bicycle nearly slipped from her grasp. The Harper file. 3 words. 3 simple words. Yet they carried enough weight to pull her backward through years of memories she had spent every day trying to escape. The cold alley disappeared. The rain disappeared. Suddenly, she remembered a bright government office with fluorescent lights. Long hallways. Locked doors. Confidential reports. People who smiled during meetings and vanished without explanation weeks later. She remembered promises. Investigations. Questions that never received answers. Most of all, she remembered the day everything changed. Ava lowered her head as a wave of emotion swept through her chest. Nobody knew about the Harper file. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it had destroyed careers, friendships, and lives. Her life included. Across the alley, Ethan noticed the change immediately. He had spent his entire adult life reading people. Negotiations, business deals, public appearances. Success often depended on recognizing the smallest shift in human behavior. He saw it now. The delivery girl had been preparing to leave. Then she had heard something. Something important enough to stop her cold. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. The realization confirmed a suspicion that had been forming since he first noticed her standing at the edge of the alley. She was not a random witness. She was connected. One of the men followed Ethan's gaze and finally noticed Ava. "Hey," he called. "This does not concern you." Several others turned toward her. Their expressions changed instantly. Some looked annoyed. Others looked nervous. One seemed genuinely surprised she was still there. Ava forced herself to remain calm. "You are right," she replied quietly. "It does not concern me." The words sounded convincing, even to her. Yet nobody fully believed them, least of all herself. Because the moment she heard the phrase Harper file, everything changed. The past was no longer buried. It was standing in front of her. Ethan studied her for another second. Then something unexpected happened. A faint expression crossed his face. Not fear, not suspicion, recognition. The recognition of someone who suddenly understood that another person in the room was carrying a burden they never asked for. The alley grew silent again. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren echoed through the city before fading away. Ava looked down at her delivery bag, then at the bicycle, then at the street leading home. A normal person would leave. A smart person would leave. But deep inside, a question she had been asking herself for 3 years refused to stay silent any longer. If the truth about the Harper file was finally resurfacing tonight, how could she walk away before learning who had brought it back? Ava had not heard the words Harper file spoken aloud since the day her entire world collapsed. The memory returned with startling clarity, not as fragments, not as distant shadows, as if it had happened yesterday. 3 years earlier, Ava Harper Johnson had worked inside a federal research and compliance division contracted to review security protocols for several private organizations. The position sounded ordinary, deliberately ordinary. Most people inside the building believed they were handling paperwork and audits. Ava had believed the same thing during her first year. Then she discovered irregularities. Small discrepancies at first. Missing reports. Altered timestamps. Entire investigations that vanished from official records overnight. The deeper she looked, the stranger everything became. She brought her concerns to supervisors. Some thanked her. Others warned her to stop asking questions. 1 month later, a project internally labeled Harper was abruptly terminated. Employees were reassigned. Records disappeared. Entire departments acted as if the project had never existed. Ava never learned who ordered the shutdown. She only knew that several people connected to the file lost their jobs within weeks. Some moved away. Some simply vanished from public view. Then came the meeting that changed her life. A senior administrator sat across from her in a glass conference room and politely informed her that her position had been eliminated. No explanation, no appeal, no warning. By the end of the week, her access credentials were revoked. Her professional references disappeared. Every opportunity she pursued afterward somehow evaporated. One door after another closed without explanation. Eventually, she stopped fighting. She changed cities, changed careers, changed expectations. Delivery work was never supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary survival. Yet survival became routine. Routine became years. And now, standing in a rain-soaked Chicago alley, she realized the past had finally caught up with her. A sudden gust of wind pulled her back to the present. The men were still watching her. Ethan Kang was still studying the situation with unsettling patience. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Ava slowly lifted her eyes toward the man who had mentioned the Harper file. He looked younger than she expected. Late 20s. Expensive shoes. Expensive watch. The appearance of confidence. Yet beneath it she detected uncertainty. He had spoken carelessly. He did not understand the significance of what he had revealed. That realization changed everything. Because if these people truly understood the Harper file, they would never have mentioned it in public. Not even here. Not even now. Across the alley, Ethan appeared to reach the same conclusion. His gaze sharpened slightly. He was putting pieces together. Ava could almost see it happening. The powerful businessman everyone feared was no longer evaluating a threat. He was investigating a mystery. Then another realization struck her. Ethan had recognized the name Harper the moment it was spoken. Not surprise. Recognition. The discovery unsettled her more than anything else that had happened tonight. How could a man from his world know anything about a forgotten government project buried years ago? The question lingered in the cold air between them. For the first time since entering the alley, Ava stopped thinking about leaving. Because deep inside she knew the truth. The ordinary life she had built was already gone. The moment the Harper file resurfaced, the path home disappeared with it. The rain continued to fall in a soft silver curtain as the tension inside the alley shifted into something stranger. Ava noticed it before anyone else. The confidence that had carried the group into this meeting was beginning to fade. Questions were replacing certainty. Assumptions were falling apart. Nobody seemed completely sure why they were there anymore. Ethan Kang remained perfectly still, his dark overcoat unmoving except for the occasional breeze. The longer the silence lasted, the more control he appeared to gain without taking a single step. It was a talent Ava had rarely seen. Most people tried to dominate a room by speaking. Ethan seemed capable of doing it simply by waiting. One of the men finally broke the silence. "You know something about Harper?" The statement was directed toward Ethan. Ethan's expression did not change. "I know enough to recognize when someone is being used." Several heads turned immediately. Ava watched the reaction carefully. There it was again. Confusion. Uncertainty. Doubt. The group had arrived believing they understood the situation. Now they were discovering that somebody had withheld important information. The realization unsettled them. Ava felt her pulse quicken. For years, she had wondered whether anyone else remembered the project. Whether anyone else had noticed the missing records, the vanished careers, the unexplained decisions. Now she stood less than 50 feet away from a man who clearly knew more than he was willing to reveal. The discovery should have frightened her. Instead, it awakened something she thought she had lost. Curiosity, determination, the desire to uncover the truth no matter how deeply it had been buried. Her eyes moved toward Ethan again. This time she noticed details she had missed before. He was not studying the men surrounding him anymore. He was studying patterns, connections, reactions. Every answer seemed to create a new question in his mind. Suddenly Ava understood why people underestimated him. They assumed his influence came from money, reputation, or fear. Yet standing here tonight, none of those advantages mattered. What mattered was his ability to see things others overlooked. It was a skill Ava recognized because she possessed a version of it herself. Years of investigations had trained her to notice inconsistencies, missing pieces, contradictions hidden beneath polished explanations. The realization startled her. For the first time all night, she felt as though she and Ethan were looking at the same puzzle. Across the alley, Another nervous glance passed between two members of the group. Ethan noticed it instantly. So did Ava. Without realizing it, they had reached the same conclusion at exactly the same moment. Someone important was missing. Not Marcus Reed. Someone above him. Someone powerful enough to manipulate events from a distance while remaining completely invisible. The thought settled heavily over the alley. Ava looked toward the dark rooftops overhead, then toward the empty street beyond. The city suddenly felt much larger than it had an hour earlier. More complicated. More dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical threats. Because the greatest danger was not standing in front of them. It was still hidden somewhere beyond their sight. And for reasons she could not yet explain, Ava was beginning to suspect that the Harper file had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right night to return. The rain finally began to weaken, leaving behind a thin layer of mist that floated through the alley like smoke. Midnight had passed, yet nobody seemed eager to leave. Ava could feel the strange pull of the moment growing stronger with every second. It was as if invisible threads were connecting people who should never have crossed paths. A delivery driver, a powerful businessman, a forgotten government project. None of it made sense. Yet all of it was somehow connected. Ethan Kang slowly looked toward the street beyond the alley. His expression remained calm, but Ava noticed something subtle. He was listening, not to the men standing around him, to the city itself. Distant traffic, a passing train, footsteps somewhere far away. He was gathering information from details most people ignored. Ava recognized the habit immediately. She used to do the same thing, back when her job required noticing what others missed. One of the men shifted uneasily. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered. "We came here for answers." Ethan finally looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "You came here because someone wanted you to ask questions in front of witnesses." The statement landed like a stone in still water. Ava watched confusion spread through the group once again. Several faces tightened. One man looked genuinely alarmed. Ethan continued before anyone could interrupt. "Think about it. You were given just enough information to show up. Just enough information to stay interested. But not enough information to understand why." Nobody answered because nobody could. Deep down, they knew he was right. Ava felt the same realization settling into her mind. Whoever was orchestrating this had never intended for the meeting to accomplish anything. The gathering itself was the objective. The uncertainty, the confusion, the questions. Someone wanted all of them standing here tonight. Together. Suddenly Ava remembered something from years earlier. A phrase an investigator once told her during the final days of the Harper Project. People hide the truth in plain sight when they know nobody understands what they are seeing. At the time, she had dismissed the comment as meaningless. Standing in the alley now, it felt prophetic. Her eyes drifted toward Ethan again. The more she observed him, the more convinced she became that he was searching for the same answer she was. Not power, not leverage. The truth. That realization surprised her more than anything else. Public stories painted Ethan Kang as a man interested only in influence and control. Yet the person standing before her appeared driven by something entirely different. Curiosity, persistence, the refusal to accept convenient explanations. Then a phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. Every head turned instantly. One of the men stared down at the screen in his hand. His face lost color. He read a message. Then read it again. "What is it?" someone asked. The man swallowed hard. "Marcus Reed is gone." Nobody spoke. The words seemed to absorb all remaining sound from the alley. Ava felt her heartbeat quicken. Gone. Not missing. Not delayed. Gone. The distinction mattered. Ethan's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He already understood what everyone else was beginning to realize. The person whose name had started this entire chain of events was no longer part of the game, which meant someone far more powerful had just moved the next piece on the board. And for the first time all night, Ava sensed that the real story was finally beginning. For a long moment, nobody spoke after hearing the message. The city seemed strangely distant, as though the world beyond the alley had continued moving while time here stood still. Ava watched the man lower his phone with trembling fingers. Whatever he had expected to read, it had not been that. Marcus Reed had always been the visible name attached to rumors, investigations, and unanswered questions. If he was suddenly out of the picture, then someone else had been operating behind him the entire time. Someone careful enough to remain invisible. Ethan Kang slowly exhaled and looked toward the far end of the alley. Now it makes sense, he said quietly. Several heads turned toward him. What makes sense? One of the men asked. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the streetlights. The wrong person was brought here tonight. Ava felt a chill run through her chest. The statement immediately caught her attention. The others looked confused. Ethan finally turned back toward them. You believed I was the reason this meeting happened. That was the story you were given. But stories are useful because they keep people from asking better questions. The alley fell silent again. Ava knew exactly what he meant. She had spent years reviewing reports filled with carefully selected information. The most effective deception was never a lie. It was an incomplete truth. Suddenly, another memory surfaced from her old life. A confidential review document. A list of names. Most had been blacked out. One remained visible by mistake. Not Marcus Reed. Not anyone she had recognized at the time. Just a surname. Holloway. The memory struck her so suddenly that she nearly dropped her bicycle. Holloway. Her eyes widened. She had not thought about that name in years. Yet now she remembered exactly where she had seen it. Attached to authorization records connected to the Harper Project. Attached to approvals nobody could explain. Attached to decisions that altered dozens of lives. Across the alley, Ethan noticed her reaction immediately. This time he did not look surprised. Instead, he looked almost certain, as though he had been waiting for someone else to reach the same conclusion. You remember something, he said calmly. Every face turned toward Ava. She suddenly felt exposed in a way she had not experienced for years. The delivery driver who spent her days being ignored was now the center of attention. Her first instinct was to deny it, to step back into the safety of anonymity. But that option no longer existed. A name, she admitted quietly. I remembered a name. Nobody interrupted. Even the rain seemed to have stopped listening. Holloway, she said. The effect was immediate. Several men exchanged uneasy glances. One looked genuinely alarmed. Ethan's expression remained unreadable, yet something flickered in his eyes. Confirmation. Ava saw it clearly. He knew the name. More importantly, he expected it. In that moment, she finally understood why fate had brought her into the alley tonight. It was never about Ethan Kang. It was never about Marcus Reed. It was never even about the 7 men who thought they were searching for answers. The real target had been hidden in plain sight from the very beginning. And as the realization settled over her, Ava understood something that made her heart pound harder than ever before. The person everyone had been searching for was not standing across from Ethan Kang. The person they had unknowingly been searching for was her. The alley became impossibly quiet after Ava spoke the name. Holloway. It hung in the air like a forgotten key finally finding the right lock. Nobody rushed to deny it. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned her memory. Their silence told her everything. For 3 years, she had wondered whether she had imagined the inconsistencies, the missing records, the vanished careers, and the unanswered questions. Now she knew she had not. The truth had been real all along. Ethan Kang studied her with an intensity that felt different from before. Not suspicion, not calculation. Respect. It was the look of someone realizing that the quietest person in the room had been carrying the most important piece of the puzzle. Ava lowered her eyes briefly. She was not used to being seen. Delivery drivers moved through the city unnoticed. People accepted their food, closed their doors, and forgot them seconds later. Yet tonight, standing beneath cold Chicago streetlights, she was no longer invisible. One of the men finally spoke. If Holloway was connected to Harper, why erase everything? Ava looked toward him. The answer arrived before she could stop it. Because some truths are more valuable hidden than exposed. The words surprised even her. They sounded like something the old Ava would have said. The investigator. The analyst. The woman who once believed facts could change the world. Ethan nodded slowly. Exactly. For the first time all night, a sense of clarity settled over the group. The meeting had never been about power. It had never been about territory, influence, or reputation. It was about information. About a forgotten story buried beneath years of silence. A story that somebody had worked very hard to keep hidden. The realization changed the atmosphere completely. Fear gave way to understanding. Confusion gave way to purpose. Ava looked toward the street leading away from the alley. Earlier that night, she had wanted nothing more than to finish her delivery and return home. Now she understood there was no returning to the version of her life that existed before midnight. Some doors only open once. Some questions refused to stay buried forever. Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm and measured. You spent 3 years running from something you did not fully understand. Ava met his gaze. And you spent years searching for it. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not triumph. Recognition. The recognition of two people arriving at the same truth from different directions. The rain had stopped completely now. Above them, the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing a few distant stars over the city skyline. The men quietly dispersed one by one, no longer searching for answers in the alley because they finally understood where the answers lived. Ava remained where she was, her bicycle beside her, her delivery bag still hanging from one shoulder. The most ordinary object in a night that had become anything but ordinary. Ethan glanced toward the bright lights of downtown Chicago. What are you going to do now? He asked. Ava thought about the question carefully. Then she looked toward the horizon and answered with a certainty she had not felt in years. I am going to stop running. Ethan nodded once. No speeches, no promises, no dramatic declarations. Just a simple acknowledgement between two strangers whose paths had crossed for a reason neither of them had expected. And as they walked out of the alley in opposite directions, each carrying a different piece of the same truth, Ava finally understood something she had forgotten long ago. Dignity is not found in power. It is found in having the courage to face the truth when the world would rather you stay silent. And on that cold Chicago night, the world finally remembered what that courage looked like.